The Murder of Robbie Wayne, age 6, by Mary Jane Chambers. Robbie Wayne's mother, Lana Wood, had been married 4 times by the time she was 24. Her job as a go-go dancer took her from one sleazy bar to another and left little time for Robbie and his half-brother Eric Bolton. Accustomed to caring for themselves, the boys, ages 5 and 7, subsisted on junk food. Nevertheless, pictures taken of them at the time showed two lively, apparently happy youngsters frolicking in the Texas sunshine, unmindful that social workers would have considered them underprivileged. In the spring of 1977, after separating from her 4th husband, Lana was living in Pecan Grove, Texas, with Harry Joe Dowd, the divorced father of a 9-year-old girl. Tall, broad-shouldered, and a brawny 245 pounds, Dowd was 10 years older than the petite, brown-haired Lana. Not long after they moved in together, Lana became pregnant and had to stop working. Then Harry hurt his leg on a construction job, and the makeshift family's only income was his workman's comp payments. There was barely enough for food. Dowd began to resent Robbie and Eric, and he felt that they were taking food out of the mouth of his own child, Wendy Jo, who now lived with them. During this period, Eric was having trouble in school, and Harry, no scholar himself, appointed himself the boy's tutor. Harry Joe was a hard taskmaster, a trait learned from his violent alcoholic father, who often punished him severely to make a man out of him. He forced Eric to study from the time he arrived home until very late at night. When the boy faltered, Dowd shut him in a closet. Some protective maternal instinct in Lana Wood's mind asserted itself, and she decided to send Eric to stay with relatives near Houston. In January 1978, Lana gave birth to her 3rd son. They named him Harry Joe Dowd, Jr. Early in April 1978, with workman's comp running out, the 2 adults and 3 children moved to Big Springs, Texas, where Lana found a job as a waitress. She left their trailer home in mid-afternoon and usually returned around 11 p.m. Harry Joe did not find work. In fact, he did not look very hard for it, claiming that the doctors who declared his leg healed were wrong. He also was tormented by suspicions that Lana had flirted with men at the restaurant, and he usually paced the floor frantically waiting for her to come home. Harry Joe had the notion that the children needed firm discipline and character-building chores. Wendy, who would have done anything to please her father, bustled about like a little housewife, washing dishes, sweeping floors, hanging out diapers. But Robbie, who had just turned 6, often rebelled at his assignments, especially taking out the trash and picking up sticks in the small yard around the trailer. One night, as she was cleaning up the restaurant just before closing time, Lana received a phone call from Harry Joe. "You'd better come home," he said. "I can't get the kid to stop screaming." "Is it Robbie or the baby?" Lana asked. "It's Robbie. He burned his hands taking out the trash, and he just keeps screaming." When Lana arrived a few minutes later, she realized that the burns had not been made by fire. The backs of Robbie's hands were dotted with holes which had eaten into the flesh. These holes continued to grow wider and deeper. Large blisters formed, and there were patches of raw, weeping flesh. But Dowd refused to allow Lana to take Robbie to a hospital, and none of the home remedies she could think of, cold water, lotions, and creams, seemed to help. Soon, Dowd admitted that the burns were caused by battery acid. He claimed that the child had gotten into an old automobile battery while taking out the trash. 3 days later, Lana took the boy to a doctor who put him in a local hospital. Robbie spent 10 days there before being transferred to a burn center. He was gone an entire month. Eventually, Harry Joe confessed to Lana that he had deliberately poured battery acid on Robbie's hands after the boy had refused to take out the trash. Child welfare workers had begun asking questions about Robbie's accident while the child was still in the hospital. Their inquiries raised the fear in Dowd that they might take away his beloved Wendy and his little Harry Joe as well. Dowd decided that the best way to impress the social workers would be to drill Robbie in his schoolwork. The boy was then in kindergarten, until he was letter perfect. Dowd thus resumed his distorted idea of education, punishing the child when he failed to count up to 20 correctly or faltered at reciting his ABCs. He tried spanking the boy harder and more frequently, but the child only became more halting in his recitations. Dowd also sent him to his room, and when that had no effect, he locked him in the broom closet. Robbie was also able to recite and count for Lana and Wendy, but he seemed to freeze whenever approached by Harry. It was a vicious cycle. The more he faltered or made mistakes, the more frequently and severely he was punished. And the more he was punished, the more he faltered. Wendy did not do well in school either, but she was never reprimanded or disciplined by her father. One afternoon, after all of his punitive measures had failed to motivate Robbie, Dowd thought of a new spur. Born of his experience in bandaging the boy's burned hands, he stuck adhesive tape to the boy's face and forearms. "Count up to 20, he demanded. The boy faltered at 9, whereupon Dowd jerked off one of the adhesive strips. He recited some more numbers, omitting 15, and Dowd pulled off another adhesive strip while the child screamed. This little game continued until Robbie's face and forearms were irritated and marked with the residue of the tape. It wasn't until Robbie left for school the following morning that Dowd realized he'd made a mistake. The kindergarten teacher might ask questions about the tape marks. Yet Dowd continued to inflict this punishment until the boy's face and forearms were raw and bleeding. He then sought another punishment. It was Sunday afternoon, and the entire family was in the trailer. "Say your numbers for your mother," Harry Joe demanded to Robbie. "No, I don't want to," the boy answered. His rebellious refusal hung in the air for a long moment. Then Dowd grabbed the startled child by one arm, dragged him to the clothes dryer, dumped him in, closed the door, and turned on the machine. After the boy had tumbled 2 or 3 turns, he stopped the dryer, and Lana helped the terrified child out of the machine. "I want you to count to 20, damn it," Dowd shouted. And as Lana and Wendy watched, too stunned to move, the boy began his halting recital. "You forgot 9, you dumbbell," Dowd yelled. Unmindful of his horrified spectators, Dowd dragged the boy to the dryer, shoved him in, closed the door, and turned on the machine for a second time. As frightened as Robbie must have been, he still was able to outwit his tormentor. On a second spin in the dryer, he braced himself so that he would not tumble as the drum rotated. This, of course, infuriated Dowd, and he would have become more violent had not Wendy and Lana intervened. "Go sit in the closet. I don't want to see or hear from you again tonight," Dowd commanded. The boy complied with relief. A week later, Paula Nelson, a veteran social worker, alerted by Robbie's teacher, knocked on the door of the Dowd Wood trailer home. Suspecting that Dowd might be causing Robbie Wayne strange bruises and lacerations, she decided to concentrate on Lana, thinking the child's own mother would defend him if needed. "Robbie certainly has a lot of bumps and bruises," Paula began. "We don't often see a child so banged up." Dowd sat motionless as though bolted into his chair, but Lana smiled disarmingly and laughed. "Robbie's one of those kids who get into everything," she explained. Paula Nelson knew that the kindergarten teacher would not believe this any more than she did herself. But the fact was, unless someone either complained or confessed, she didn't have a case for removing the child from the home of a natural parent. "Well, here's my card with my cell phone number on it," she said to Lana. "If you have any problems at all, just call me." She had given Lana the opportunity to report Dowd's abuses. After all, a young woman who spends 40 hours a week in a restaurant has plenty of chances to telephone whomever she wishes. It was an offer Lana never accepted. Some days after his visit, Dowd formed a new plan. "I think we should put Robbie in the orphan's home," he told Lana, "and let them see if they can straighten him out." "Well, that's a good idea," she agreed, "but we'll have to wait until his bruises heal. This is a frequent syndrome in child abuse, everyone. The adults who have lost control of themselves decide to turn the child over to the surrogate parents. But they feel they had better wait until the bruises and lacerations clear up. As y'all can imagine or guess, this tragedy is that before those old bruises heal, the abusers lose control again and inflict new wounds." Dowd had also made another decision. "We're going to have to get out of Texas," he told Lana, "now that the social workers are on our case." So 2 days later, they loaded Dowd's old brown station wagon with their belongings and headed for southwestern Oklahoma. It was rumored that the area, having acquired new industry, had job opportunities, and Harry claimed that he was going to look for some work. From time to time, all of us make decisions that may mean life or death to others, perhaps even to strangers. Airline pilots and surgeons are called upon to take such responsibility frequently. But ordinary people in everyday situations make life or death decisions too. As the Dowd Wood Wayne family drove onto U.S. Highway 20 and headed east, a middle-aged couple, Frank and Gladys Chapman, were preparing to leave their home in Abilene and go west on that same highway. Later that day, they were to make a life-and-death decision regarding Robbie Wayne. Leaving Big Spring, Dowd and Lana were sitting in the front seat of the car. The middle seat was occupied by Wendy, Robbie, and the baby in his basket. The back part of the station wagon was filled to overflowing with clothes, dishes, pans, and other belongings. "I want you to count to 20, Harry Joe," ordered Robbie. No, I don't feel like it, the boy countered. Come on, Robbie, count for your dad, Lana urged. He's not my dad, the spunky child responded. This so enraged Harry Joe that he nearly drove the car off the highway. Lana's reaction to the boy's impudence was to turn around and slap him across the face as hard as she could. I tell you, Lana, we're going to have to send that boy to an orphan's home, Harry Joe said. I agree with you, Harry, but his bruises still aren't healed up, Lana answered, seemingly unaware that she had probably added a bruise or two a moment earlier. It was almost noon when Dad had an idea that he felt would surely make Robbie obey him. When they pulled into a highway rest area for lunch, of potato chips and soda, he would leave the boy for a time, pretending to drive off. Harry Joe was sure that would frighten the orneriness out of him. It was easier than Dad had thought. When they began to climb back into their car after the snack, Robbie lagged behind. Dad started the motor, but the boy remained seated at a picnic table. We're leaving you, Robbie, he called. You're such a bad boy, we don't want you anymore. Then he drove the car toward a remote corner of the parking lot, and just as he passed the westbound entrance to the rest area, Dad was startled to see a car pulling in and heading for the picnic area. It was Frank and Gladys Chapman, who had decided to stop and eat lunch. They saw the boy before they got out of their car. Look, Frank, there's a little boy sitting there all by himself, Gladys remarked. He must be lost or something, Frank replied. The Chapmans, carrying their picnic basket, approached the table at which the boy sat. What's your name? Gladys Chapman asked gently. Robbie. What are you doing here all by yourself? Frank Chapman asked. Harry says I'm going to the orphan's home, Robbie answered. The Chapmans had raised a son and a daughter, and were now the grandparents of 2 boys and a girl, so they knew that one cannot always take children's comments at face value. They could not imagine anyone abandoning a nice little boy like this, so they assumed that he had somehow become lost. Would you like one of my extra special ham sandwiches? Gladys Chapman asked as she opened the picnic basket. The boy wolfed it down. He also devoured an apple, a banana, and 2 cookies. Harry, never a man who could cope with difficult situations, had at first panicked and almost decided to abandon the child in reality. Fear that he had been seen by the occupants of the car coming from the westbound lane prevented him from actually doing so. He drove back to the picnic area, parked the car a short distance from the tables, and began calling the boy. Robbie sat there munching cookies and basking in the unaccustomed warmth of 2 adults giving him their kindly, undivided attention. Come on, Robbie, we gotta go, Dad called. Wendy Jo, dispatched by her father, came into view, but the boy remained seated, reluctant to move. Finally, she took the child by the hand and led him back to the car. Gladys Chapman was a very organized woman. Instinctively, she pulled out a pad and jotted down the license number of the car. He sure didn't want to go with him, did he? Frank said. Did you see all the cuts and bruises on that child? What do you think we ought to do? Report it to the police? They pondered the question for nearly half an hour. What did they really have to go on? A child who ate ravenously, was covered with cuts and bruises, seemed happy to have been abandoned and reluctant to return. The Chapmans were kind, church-going people who would have been horrified if they had known Robbie Wayne's true situation. They did not fear becoming involved as much as they feared making a mistake. If there was no substance to their suspicion, they would have been greatly embarrassed at having reported it. That little girl certainly seemed well cared for, Gladys Chapman reflected. She was a polite little thing, too. So they finally decided not to report the incident, having convinced themselves that any family who could produce such a nice little girl could not possibly be mistreating her brother. The Chapmans were unacquainted with statistics which reveal that child abuse is not necessarily inflicted on all the children in a household. Often there is just one who, for some reason, becomes the whipping boy. The piece of paper with Dad's license number on it remained in Mrs. Chapman's purse for several days until she methodically threw it away. With it went Robbie Wayne's hope for survival.